Shalom. Today we're going to look at a curious correspondence between two verbs which occurs both in English and in Hebrew. If we have the verb to count in English, we are talking about numbering an amount of things. But if we put an RE prefix before it, we actually have two options. If the accent's on the RE, recount, either as a verb or a noun, it means to count something again, which is what we would expect from the RE prefix in English. But if the accent's on the count, recount, it means to tell a story, as he recounted his adventures. Both these verbs are represented by the same root in Hebrew, and that is samech peresh, safar. Maybe you recognize this root as the word for book, sefer, which occurs both in modern Hebrew and in the biblical text. Now, the concept of a book, as we look at it here, is newer than writing of lists. This book is called a codex, and the codex came about perhaps in the 4th century BC. Previous to that, there was writing on scrolls or clay tablets. We see the use of safar as a accumulation of written items used variously throughout the Tanakh. In Genesis 5:1, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him. Is there a codex, a scroll that actually has these? Perhaps Moses is indicating that he is going to write these generations here in Genesis 5. Exodus 17:14. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua, for I will utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Moses did write something down, but it wasn't a codex book form. It was a written document. Exodus 24:7. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, All that Jehovah hath said we will do, and be obedient. Again, a scroll that Moses wrote. Exodus 32:33. And Jehovah said unto Moses, Whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. Does the Father in heaven have a written codex? Well, I'm sure he doesn't need one. He can remember all this stuff. If we go to the Strongs, as we see in the Blue Letter Bible, there are 4 different forms of this verb. And we're going to cover first the 2 major ones. And we see that the definitions in red, that are circled in red, are the kal or the pa'al definitions, to count, to number, and also the word for scribe comes underneath this group. We also see the ones in blue. These are the PL. They are the stronger form, and these are the ones that are associated with telling, to talk, to tell a story. We'll also cover the other 2 at the end, Nifal and Pual. Now, if all these words are new to you, Pa'al, Kal, Piel, Nifal, you can go back to the beginning of the verbs workshop and get an overview of what these terms mean. Briefly, Hebrew has a unique verb structure in which the same roots are used to express different strengths of the verb. The simplest being pa'al, or sometimes called kal, a stronger one piel, causative one the hifil, and the reflexive hitpa'el, and then all their corresponding passive forms. So in the simplest form, in the kal form, this verb root safar means to count or number. Genesis 15:5. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell or count the stars, if thou be able to number them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. Both the verbs here are the same, to tell or to count and to number. Genesis 41:49. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. Now, when you are in Blue Letter Bible, you are able to get a lot of information about each of these verbs by clicking first on the interlinear, so you have each word separate, and next to the verbs on the right side will be an oval with a bunch of letters, and if you click on those letters, you will get the boxes like you see here, and they are about the Hebrew parsing of the verbs. So the first verb we had where God says to Abraham, count or tell, we see that it's written as u spor. If we come down to where the red arrow is, you see that it says call. It's the simplest form of the verb, and right below that it says imperative. It's a command form. God is telling him, count. At the end of the verse, God says, if you are able to count them. And that's in the second box here on the right, lispor. And again, if you come down to the red arrow, it's call, it's the basic form, and again, it's the infinitive construct, to count. Now from this verb root, we have a noun, which is the noun for number, and that is mispar. Elsewhere, we have talked about the mem as a noun prefix. Again, we see the same verse, Genesis 41:49, and Joseph gathered corn as the sand in the sea very much, until he left off numbering the verb lispor to count, for it was without number, mispar, the noun. Leviticus 25:15, according to the number of years after the Jubilee, thou shalt buy of thy neighbor, and according to the number of the years of fruits, he shall sell unto thee. This is the noun, number comes from the same root. Now, how does the noun, the person, the scribe, fit into this scheme? We see in 2 Samuel 8:17, and Zadok, the son of Achitub, and Achimelech, the son of Abiatar, were the priests, and Sariah was the scribe. Ezekiel 9:3, and the glory of God of Israel was gone up from the cherub, whereupon he was to the threshold of the house, and he called to the man clothed with linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. It's the inkhorn of the writer. If you're not familiar with Ezekiel 9, I recommend the chapter. You'll find it very interesting. So what is this word for scribe? This word is sofer. And what this is the present tense verb form for safar, to number, to count. We see it listed in blue letter as a noun. It doesn't explain to you about the fact that it comes from the verb. The present tense verb in the masculine singular. The present tense verb can always be used as a noun as the person who is doing the activity. So the word for he is writing, or he writes, or the writer are the same word. I have given you the conjugation for the present tense verbs here. Present tense pa'al verb here. This is from the verbs workshop. You can go check that out. So we see for the verb shamar, the present tense masculine singular is shomer. That form is the form that is used for scribe for the verb safar, sofer. And maybe you have heard about the Sophrim, the scribes. They're the scribes and the Pharisees. Those are these people. Now, why is the person who writes connected to the person who counts as opposed to the person who tells the story? Historically, the person who was writing was keeping accounts of something. They were making lists or keeping records, and it was more in the sense of enumeration than telling the story. When we think of the Torah, we think, well, the Torah is telling the story. But the person who is doing the writing is more of an enumerator, person keeping track of numbers or other lists. In addition to that, the tradition of writing a Torah scroll, which is a very intensive procedure, involves when the sofer, the scribe, finishes each line, he adds up the letter values of the original, and then he compares it to the letter values of what he has written. This is more accurate than just counting the number of letters. He could make the correct number of letters, but perhaps if he substitutes a vav instead of a yud, which is a common error that we see even in some Torah scrolls, if he adds up the numeration of the letters, he will come to the wrong number because Vav is worth 6 and Yud is worth 10. So he is, in a sense, continually counting, and that is part of the reason that the scribe is the sofer, he is the counter, the enumerator. On the PL side, which is a stronger interpretation of the verb, we see this. Exodus 10:2. And that thou mayest tell in the ears of thy son, and of thy son's son, what things I have wrought in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that ye may know how that I am Jehovah. in 2 Kings 8:5. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead body to life, that, behold, the woman whose son had restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life. So just looking at these two forms of the verb to tell, in Exodus we see a future tense, that thou will tell, you may tell in the future. And in the Kings we see that he was telling, it's actually a present tense, he is telling him. Looking at these in the Blue Letter Bible, we see the first is tisaper. If you go down to the red arrow, you see that it's PL, it's the more intensive form, it's the recount form, not the counting form, but the recount, the telling form. And we see that it's an imperfect verb, it's in the future. The one on the right, misaper, if you go down to the red arrow, it's PL, it's the intensive form, but it is a participle. It's active, it's present tense, he's doing it at that moment. Now looking at the two other binyanim, the two other forms that appear in that initial list, we see that there was a nifal and a pual. So the nifal is the passive form of the pa'al, the simplest. Genesis 16:10. And the angel of Jehovah said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. The seed is not doing anything. The seed is receiving the action. It's passive. Psalm 22:30. A seed shall serve him. It shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. It shall be counted to the Lord. Again, the seed is not doing anything, but it will be told about. Somebody will tell about the seed for the generation. This is the pual. The pual is the passive form of this PL. Let's look at it. So the first one appears as yisafer. Again, if we come down to the arrow, we see that it's nifal, it's a passive form, and it's imperfect. It's in the future. The second one is yisupar, and we see that it's pual. Pual is the passive form of the intensive form to tell. It will be told about, also in the future. There's one more word that might possibly be related to that root, and that word is sapphire, which means sapphire. It's an English cognate. Exodus 24:10. And they saw the God of Israel, and there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone, and as it were the body of heaven in his clearness. Again, describing the same place in Ezekiel 1:26. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness of the appearance of a man above upon it. So what has sapphire got to do with these words? Possibly because of the many facets of the stone and the beauty of the stone. The facets are uncountable. Possibly because it's a very hard stone that might have been used to actually etch tablets to be used for the writing. However, some people believe that it's just of a foreign origin, and it's one of those things that appears the same in many languages across the board. Like the word for tea or coffee, in almost every language, it's the same because the product comes with the name into the different cultures. I pray that you're enjoying your Hebrew study. Until next time, tasimita inayim al hashemayim. Keep your eye on the sky, your redemption draweth nigh. Shalom.